Question 1. Upon reviewing a vehicle in Bay of Plenty exhibiting significant erratic driving, including swerving across lanes and sudden braking, what is the most appropriate regulatory compliant course of action to ensure public safety? Option A. Ignore the erratic driving, assuming the driver will correct their behavior without intervention. Option B. Observe the vehicle's behavior and, if it continues to pose a clear and present danger, report the specific observations to the appropriate authorities, such as the police. Option C. Directly call the police and state that you believe the driver is under the influence of alcohol or drugs based on their driving pattern. Option D. Immediately pull alongside the erratic vehicle and attempt to signal the driver to stop or pull over. The correct answer is B. Observe the vehicle's behavior and, if it continues to pose a clear and present danger, report the specific observations to the appropriate authorities, such as the police. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for drivers in Bay of Plenty, navigating a situation where a vehicle is exhibiting erratic behavior, raising concerns about the driver's fitness to operate a vehicle. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for public safety with the legal and ethical considerations of reporting a potential hazard without making unsubstantiated accusations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is proportionate and legally sound under New Zealand's road safety regulations. The best approach involves observing the vehicle's behavior and, if it continues to pose a clear and present danger, reporting it to the appropriate authorities with factual observations. This aligns with the general duty of care individuals have to report potential road safety hazards. Specifically, under New Zealand's Land Transport Act 1998 and associated regulations, drivers are expected to operate vehicles safely. While there isn't a direct legal obligation to report every instance of poor driving, a pattern of dangerous behavior that demonstrably endangers others warrants intervention. Reporting to the police or relevant transport authorities with specific details allows them to investigate and take appropriate action, respecting due process. This approach prioritizes safety while adhering to legal frameworks. An incorrect approach would be to directly confront the driver of the erratic vehicle. This could escalate the situation, potentially leading to a dangerous confrontation and putting oneself or others at further risk. It also bypasses the established channels for reporting and investigating traffic violations, which are designed to ensure fairness and proper procedure. Furthermore, taking matters into one's own hands could have legal repercussions if it is perceived as harassment or vigilantism. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the erratic driving altogether. It might seem like the path of least resistance. It fails to acknowledge the potential danger posed to other road users. This inaction could be seen as a dereliction of the general civic responsibility to contribute to public safety, especially when a clear hazard is evident. In situations where a driver's impairment or dangerous behavior is obvious and poses an immediate threat, passive observation without reporting is professionally and ethically questionable. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to immediately assume the driver is under the influence of alcohol or drugs and make a direct accusation when reporting. While impairment might be a possibility, it is crucial to report observed behaviors rather than making definitive diagnoses. The authorities are equipped to assess impairment. Reporting based on assumptions rather than observable facts can lead to misdirected investigations and potential reputational damage for the person being reported if the assumptions are unfounded. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve 1. Assess the immediate danger. Is the erratic driving posing a clear and present risk to others? 2. Observe and document. Note specific behaviors, e.g., swerving, sudden braking, inconsistent speed without making assumptions about the cause. 3. Consider reporting channels. If danger is evident, identify the appropriate authority, e.g., police for immediate threats, NZTA for ongoing concerns. 4. Report factually. Provide observed behaviors and location to the authorities. 5. Prioritize safety. Avoid direct confrontation and ensure personal safety. Question 2. When evaluating a driver's performance during their Bay of Plenty driver's test, which approach best demonstrates compliance with the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 and safe driving practices? Option A. Prioritizing completing the test as quickly as possible by driving at the maximum legal speed limit at all times. Option B. Completing all required maneuvers efficiently, even if it means occasionally neglecting a blind spot check before changing lanes. Option C. Assuming that once a maneuver is completed, the need for observation and signaling is no longer critical for that specific action. Option D. Consistently demonstrating adherence to all aspects of the land transport driver licensing. Rule 2017, including correct observation techniques, appropriate speed selection, clear signaling, and maintaining safe distances throughout the test. The correct answer is D. Consistently demonstrating adherence to all aspects of the land transport driver licensing. Rule 2017, including correct observation techniques, appropriate speed selection, clear signaling, and maintaining safe distances throughout the test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to demonstrate not only practical driving skills, but also a thorough understanding of the road rules and safe driving practices specific to New Zealand. The examiner's role is to assess compliance with the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, and associated land transport New Zealand guidelines, ensuring the applicant is a safe and responsible road user. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these regulations can lead to a failed test and potential safety risks on public roads. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant consistently demonstrating adherence to all aspects of the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, including correct observation techniques, appropriate speed selection, clear signaling, and maintaining safe distances. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the purpose of the driver licensing regime in New Zealand, which is to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed. The examiner is specifically looking for evidence that the applicant can operate a vehicle safely and in accordance with the law, as outlined in the rule. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on completing the required maneuvers without paying attention to the broader context of safe driving, such as failing to check blind spots before changing lanes, or not maintaining appropriate speed on different road types. This is incorrect because it demonstrates a lack of comprehensive understanding of safe driving principles and a failure to comply with the observation and speed requirements stipulated in the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that once a maneuver is completed, the immediate need for observation and signaling ceases. For example, continuing to signal after a turn is completed or failing to maintain observation after merging into traffic. This is incorrect, as it shows a disregard for continuous situational awareness, a key component of safe driving, and a requirement implicitly and explicitly covered by the principles of the rule. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed over safety, attempting to rush through the test to complete it quickly. This is incorrect because the land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017, emphasizes safe driving practices, which often means driving at an appropriate speed for the conditions, not necessarily the fastest possible speed. Exceeding speed limits or driving too fast for the road conditions would be a direct contravention of the rule. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach driver testing with a mindset of demonstrating competence and compliance. This involves understanding the specific regulations governing driver licensing in their jurisdiction. In this case, New Zealand's land transport driver licensing, Rule 2017. A structured approach to driving, focusing on observation, signaling, speed management, and adherence to all road rules, is paramount. Professionals should anticipate potential challenges and practice scenarios that test these specific requirements. If unsure about a particular rule or expectation, seeking clarification from official sources or a qualified instructor is a prudent step before the test. The decision-making process should always prioritize safety and regulatory compliance over speed or perceived efficiency. Question 3. The analysis reveals that Mr. Henderson, a resident of the Bay of Plenty, is applying for Class 1 driver's license with endorsements for operating heavy rigid vehicles. He states he has extensive experience driving similar vehicles in his previous role as a farm manager, though he has not held a specific heavy vehicle license before. Which of the following approaches best ensures regulatory compliance and public safety in processing Mr. Henderson's application? Option A. Grant Mr. Henderson a Class 1 license with the relevant endorsements based on his self-declared extensive experience, assuming his farm management role provided him with adequate skills and knowledge for operating heavy rigid vehicles on public roads. Option B. Issue a provisional Class 1 license with a note requiring Mr. Henderson to undergo further training within 6 months, acknowledging his experience but recognizing the need for formal licensing. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of Mr. Henderson's existing license. Verify his eligibility for a Class 1 license with the required endorsements according to NZTA regulations, and administer a comprehensive practical driving test that specifically assesses his competency in operating the heavy rigid vehicle type for which the endorsement is sought, adhering strictly to all NZTA testing protocols. Option D. Proceed with a shortened practical test, focusing only on basic maneuvers. As Mr. Henderson's stated experience suggests, he is already proficient in operating heavy rigid vehicles. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of Mr. Henderson's existing license. Verify his eligibility for a Class 1 license with the required endorsements according to NZTA regulations, and administer a comprehensive practical driving test that specifically assesses his competency in operating the heavy rigid vehicle type for which the endorsement is sought, adhering strictly to all NZTA testing protocols. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a driver applicant, Mr. Henderson, is seeking to obtain a Class 1 driver's license in New Zealand, specifically within the Bay of Plenty region. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that Mr. Henderson meets all the regulatory requirements for this license class, which involves specific endorsements for heavy vehicles, without compromising the integrity of the testing process or the safety standards mandated by the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. The testing officer must balance efficiency with thoroughness, ensuring all legal obligations are met. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of Mr. Henderson's existing license, driving history, and the specific requirements for the Class 1 license with the relevant endorsements. This includes verifying that he has completed the necessary prerequisite stages, such as holding a Class 4 license for a specified period, and that his medical fitness is up to date as per the Land Transport Rule. Driver licensing. The testing officer must then conduct a practical assessment that rigorously tests the skills and knowledge required for operating the specific heavy vehicle type for which the endorsement is sought, adhering strictly to the NZTA-approved testing procedures and assessment criteria. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the NZTA mandate to ensure that only competent and legally qualified individuals are granted heavy vehicle licenses, thereby upholding public safety on New Zealand roads. It prioritizes regulatory compliance and a thorough assessment of practical skills. An incorrect approach would be to assume Mr. Henderson's experience operating similar vehicles in his previous employment is sufficient without formal verification and assessment against the NZTA standards. This fails to acknowledge that professional driving licenses are granted based on demonstrated competency against specific regulatory benchmarks, not just perceived experience. Another incorrect approach would be to expedite the testing process by overlooking certain procedural steps or assessment criteria, such as a detailed vehicle inspection or a comprehensive road test, based on a desire to be efficient or accommodating. This directly contravenes the NZTA regulations, which stipulate a standardized and thorough testing regime to ensure driver competence and road safety. A further incorrect approach would be to grant the license based on a verbal assurance from Mr. Henderson about his knowledge of heavy vehicle regulations without a formal assessment, as this bypasses the legally mandated testing and verification processes designed to protect the public. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing regulations, NZTA land transport rules, and associated guidelines. This framework involves a systematic checklist approach to verify all prerequisite documentation and qualifications. It then mandates a standardized, objective assessment of practical skills and knowledge against defined criteria. Any deviation from these established procedures must be justifiable within the regulatory framework itself, not based on personal judgment or expediency. The paramount consideration must always be compliance with the law and the assurance of public safety. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that when approaching an intersection in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, a driver encounters a green traffic light but also observes a police officer directing traffic to stop. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant action for the driver to take? Option A. Proceed through the intersection because the traffic light is green. Option B. Stop the vehicle and wait for the traffic light to turn red. Option C. Stop the vehicle as directed by the police officer. Option D. Hesitate and attempt to follow both the traffic light and the officer's signals simultaneously. The correct answer is C. Stop the vehicle as directed by the police officer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to interpret and apply road rules in a dynamic, real-world situation where immediate decisions have safety implications. The driver must not only recall the rules, but also assess the immediate environment, predict the actions of other road users, and make a safe choice under potential pressure. The presence of a police officer directing traffic adds a layer of complexity, as their directions may supersede standard traffic signals, demanding careful observation and judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the directions of the police officer over the standard traffic signals. This approach is correct because Section 129 of the Land Transport Road User, Rule 2004 in New Zealand, explicitly states that a driver must obey the directions of a traffic officer who is directing traffic. This regulation is paramount for ensuring road safety and maintaining order, as traffic officers are trained to manage complex traffic situations, and their directions are legally binding. Adhering to this rule demonstrates an understanding of the hierarchy of traffic control and a commitment to safe driving practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed based solely on the green traffic light, ignoring the police officer's signals. This is a regulatory failure as it directly contravenes Section 129 of the Land Transport Road User, Rule 2004. Ethically, it is unsafe as it disregards a direct instruction intended to manage traffic flow and prevent accidents, potentially leading to a collision. Another incorrect approach is to stop completely at the intersection, waiting for the traffic light to change, despite the officer's directions. This is also a regulatory failure because it fails to obey the traffic officer's direction, as mandated by law. It creates an unnecessary obstruction and can disrupt the organized flow of traffic that the officer is trying to establish, potentially causing confusion and hazardous situations for other road users. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to proceed through the intersection while also trying to interpret the traffic light and the officer's signals simultaneously, leading to hesitation and erratic movement. This is a failure in professional decision-making and safe driving practice. While not a direct violation of a single rule, it demonstrates a lack of clear judgment and can be dangerous. The law requires clear adherence to the officer's direction, and indecision can be as hazardous as outright disobedience. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Observation. Actively observing the entire intersection and all traffic control devices, including signals and personnel. 2. Prioritization. Understanding the hierarchy of traffic control where directions from a traffic officer supersede traffic signals. 3. Action. Executing a clear and decisive action based on the highest priority instruction. 4. Confirmation. Briefly confirming the safety of the maneuver before proceeding. In this case, the officer's direction is the highest priority. Question 5. Implementation of the Land Transport Driver Licensing. Rule 2017 in Bay of Plenty requires driver testing officers to assess an applicant's ability to perceive and respond to hazards. During a test drive on a moderately busy local road, an applicant hesitates for a moment before proceeding through an intersection with a clear right-of-way, but ultimately completes the maneuver without incident. What is the most appropriate course of action for the testing officer? Option A. Immediately fail the applicant for demonstrating a lack of decisive action at an intersection, as per the strict interpretation of hazard response requirements. Option B. Note the hesitation as a potential area for feedback if other minor concerns arise, but continue the test, focusing on overall safe driving performance and adherence to traffic laws. Option C. Ask the applicant to explain their hesitation immediately, potentially disrupting their focus and the flow of the test, to ascertain the cause of the delay. Option D. Overlook the hesitation entirely, assuming it was a minor lapse that did not impede traffic flow or create a safety risk, and proceed with the test without further comment. The correct answer is B. Note the hesitation as a potential area for feedback if other minor concerns arise, but continue the test, focusing on overall safe driving performance and adherence to traffic laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver testing officer in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, requiring them to balance the need for thorough assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources. The officer must ensure that the applicant demonstrates competence across all required driving skills, as mandated by the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, while also adhering to the operational guidelines set by the Bay of Plenty Testing Center. The core challenge lies in identifying and addressing potential safety risks that might not be immediately obvious during a standard test, without unfairly penalizing the applicant. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured approach that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This means meticulously observing the applicant's performance against the criteria outlined in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, specifically focusing on hazard perception, vehicle control, and adherence to traffic laws. If any area of concern arises, such as hesitation in a critical situation or a minor lapse in observation, the officer should note it, and if it impacts safety or demonstrates a lack of understanding of the rules, use it as a basis for further assessment or a specific feedback point. This approach ensures that the test is comprehensive, fair, and upholds the safety standards expected for obtaining a driver's license in Bay of Plenty. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to overlook minor hesitations or brief lapses in observation, assuming they are insignificant, especially if the applicant ultimately completes the maneuver successfully. This fails to adequately assess the applicant's consistent hazard perception and defensive driving skills, which are crucial for safe operation on Bay of Plenty roads. Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 emphasizes the importance of proactive observation and timely decision-making, not just the successful completion of a maneuver. Another incorrect approach is to immediately fail the applicant for a single minor error, such as a slight hesitation at an intersection, without considering the overall context of their driving performance or the specific circumstances. While the rules require a certain standard, the assessment should be holistic. A minor error, if not indicative of a systemic issue or a significant safety risk, might be better addressed through constructive feedback rather than immediate failure, allowing the applicant an opportunity to demonstrate improvement. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the applicant's ability to follow instructions without actively assessing their independent decision-making and hazard identification skills. The test is designed to evaluate a driver's ability to navigate real-world traffic situations safely, which requires more than just mechanical execution of commands. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 requires assessment of the applicant's ability to perceive and respond to hazards, a skill that can be compromised if the officer's role becomes overly directive. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and safety-first mindset. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and the operational guidelines of the Bay of Plenty Testing Center. When assessing an applicant, they should maintain objective observation, document all significant observations, and make decisions based on whether the applicant's performance meets the required safety and competency standards. If doubts arise, further probing or specific questioning related to the observed behavior is warranted before making a final decision. The goal is to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed. Question 6. To address the challenge of obtaining a driver's license in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, a prospective driver recalls a driving disqualification they received in Australia 5 years ago, which has since expired. The current application form asks about any previous driving disqualifications or suspensions. What is the most appropriate action for the applicant to take regarding this Australian disqualification? Option A. Wait to be asked specifically about international driving history before mentioning the Australian disqualification. Option B. Only provide details of their New Zealand driving history, as the Australian disqualification is not relevant to a New Zealand license. Option C. Fully disclose the Australian driving disqualification to the New Zealand Transport Agency, explaining its nature and that it has expired. Option D. State that the Australian disqualification is irrelevant because it occurred in another country and is no longer active. The correct answer is C. Fully disclose the Australian driving disqualification to the New Zealand Transport Agency, explaining its nature and that it has expired. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver applying for a license in the Bay of Plenty region of New Zealand. The challenge lies in accurately and honestly representing their driving history, specifically concerning any previous disqualifications or suspensions, to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. Failing to disclose this information, even if it occurred outside of New Zealand, can have significant implications for the integrity of the licensing process and public safety. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action when faced with a question about driving history that might be perceived as complex due to its international nature. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a full and transparent disclosure of all relevant driving history, including any disqualifications or suspensions, regardless of where they occurred. This approach aligns with the principles of honesty and integrity fundamental to the licensing process. The NZTA Land Transport Rule, Driver Licensing 2017, specifically Rule 30, mandates that applicants must provide accurate information. While the rule primarily focuses on New Zealand history, the spirit of the law and the NZTA application forms generally require disclosure of any factors that might impact a person's suitability to drive. Therefore, proactively informing the NZTA about the previous disqualification in Australia, even if it was some time ago and has expired, demonstrates a commitment to compliance and allows the agency to make an informed decision. This upholds the regulatory requirement for truthful application and contributes to road safety by ensuring all potential risks are assessed. Incorrect approaches analysis, providing only the New Zealand driving history without mentioning the Australian disqualification, is an incorrect approach. This fails to meet the requirement for providing accurate and complete information. While the disqualification was not in New Zealand, it is a significant event in the applicant's driving record that the NZTA may consider relevant to their suitability to hold a New Zealand license. So omission could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal relevant information, potentially leading to the refusal of the license or even future penalties if discovered. Stating that the Australian disqualification is irrelevant because it occurred in another country is also an incorrect approach. The NZTA has the discretion to consider driving history from other jurisdictions when assessing an applicant's suitability. Dismissing the relevance of a past disqualification without consulting the NZTA or understanding their policies on international driving records is a failure to exercise due diligence and can lead to misrepresentation. Waiting to be asked specifically about international driving history before disclosing the Australian disqualification is an incorrect approach. Application forms typically have broad questions about driving history, and it is the applicant's responsibility to interpret these questions in a way that ensures full disclosure. Assuming a specific question will be asked is a passive approach that risks omitting crucial information. The onus is on the applicant to be proactive in providing all relevant details. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. When faced with an application question about driving history, they should consider any past driving infringements, suspensions, or disqualifications, irrespective of the jurisdiction. If there is any doubt about the relevance or completeness of the information provided, the best course of action is to err on the side of caution and disclose the information. This involves carefully reading all application questions and providing truthful and comprehensive answers. If an applicant has a history that might be relevant, they should seek clarification from the relevant authority, in this case, the NZTA, or provide the information upfront. This demonstrates integrity and ensures compliance with regulatory requirements, fostering trust in the licensing system and contributing to public safety. Question 7. Examination of the data shows that during a practical driver licensing test in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, a candidate momentarily stalled their vehicle at a controlled intersection after a brief, unexpected loud noise from a passing truck. The candidate immediately expressed distress, stating they were shaken up. What is the most appropriate course of action for the testing officer? Option A. Continue the test without acknowledging the candidate's distress, assuming they will recover their composure independently. Option B. Offer the candidate significant reassurance and guidance on how to proceed through the intersection to help them regain confidence. Option C. Pause the test, allow the candidate a moment to compose themselves, and then assess their ability to safely resume driving and complete the remainder of the test. Option D. Immediately fail the candidate for stalling the vehicle, as this demonstrates a lack of control. The correct answer is C. Pause the test, Allow the candidate a moment to compose themselves, and then assess their ability to safely resume driving and complete the remainder of the test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver testing officer in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, as it involves balancing the need for a safe and competent driver with the potential for a candidate to experience anxiety or a temporary lapse in concentration. The officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure the integrity of the testing process while also being fair and objective. The specific context of the Bay of Plenty region, while not directly impacting the core regulatory principles, grounds the scenario in a real-world setting governed by New Zealand's Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves acknowledging the candidate's immediate concern and assessing its impact on their ability to safely control the vehicle. This approach prioritizes safety by first ensuring the candidate can regain composure and demonstrate control before proceeding with the test. It aligns with the overarching objective of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999, which is to ensure that only drivers who meet the required standards of competence and fitness are licensed. By pausing the test and allowing the candidate to address their immediate distress, the officer is acting in accordance with the principle of assessing the candidate's current ability to drive safely, rather than penalizing a momentary, correctable issue. This demonstrates professional discretion and a commitment to fair assessment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately failing the candidate due to the minor incident. This fails to consider that the incident was a momentary lapse, not necessarily indicative of a fundamental lack of driving skill or judgment. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999 emphasizes assessing overall competence, and a single, minor, correctable error should not automatically lead to failure if the candidate can demonstrate they can continue safely. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the candidate's distress and continue the test as if nothing happened. This is professionally unacceptable as it disregards the candidate's well-being and potentially their ability to concentrate. A distressed driver is a less safe driver, and continuing the test under such circumstances could compromise the safety of the candidate, the examiner, and other road users, violating the spirit of the licensing rules. A further incorrect approach is to offer excessive reassurance or coaching during the test. While empathy is important, the role of the examiner is to assess, not to teach or guide the candidate through the test. Providing undue assistance undermines the objectivity of the assessment and could lead to the licensing of a driver who has not truly demonstrated independent competence, contravening the purpose of the licensing framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, fairness, and adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the situation. Is there an immediate safety risk? 2. Consideration of the candidate's state. Is the candidate distressed or impaired? 3. Application of the rules. How does the incident relate to the criteria for passing or failing the test as outlined in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 1999? 4. Professional judgment. Can the candidate safely continue the test after addressing the immediate issue? 5. Documentation. Record the incident and the decision made. This structured approach ensures that decisions are not arbitrary, but are based on a thorough evaluation of the circumstances and regulatory obligations. Question 8. Research into driving instructor responsibilities in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, has revealed a scenario where a driving instructor becomes aware that a learner driver may have a medical condition that could potentially impair their driving ability, but the learner has not explicitly disclosed this condition to the instructor. What is the most appropriate course of action for the driving instructor to take in this situation, considering their professional obligations and the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017? Option A. Immediately report the learner's potential medical condition to the NZTA without attempting to discuss it with the learner or gather further details. Option B. Advise the learner to simply obtain a medical certificate from their doctor without further inquiry into the nature of the condition or its implications for driving. Option C. Ignore the information about the medical condition, assuming it is a private matter for the learner to address with the NZTA. Option D. Discreetly attempt to gather more information from the learner about their medical condition and its potential impact on driving. If concerns persist or the learner is unwilling to provide sufficient information, report the concerns to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. Correct answer is D. Discreetly attempt to gather more information from the learner about their medical condition and its potential impact on driving. If concerns persist or the learner is unwilling to provide sufficient information, report the concerns to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, who is aware of a learner driver's undisclosed medical condition that could impair their driving ability. The challenge lies in balancing the learner's right to privacy with the paramount responsibility for public safety on the roads. Careful judgment is required to navigate this ethical and regulatory tightrope. The best approach involves prioritizing public safety and adhering to the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. This approach requires the instructor to discreetly gather more information from the learner regarding their medical condition and its potential impact on their driving. If the learner remains unwilling to disclose sufficient information, or if the instructor has reasonable grounds to believe the condition poses a significant risk, the instructor has a professional and legal obligation to report their concerns to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to the public and the specific requirements of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which mandates reporting of medical conditions that may affect a person's ability to drive safely. The instructor's role extends beyond teaching driving skills to ensuring that only fit and capable individuals are licensed. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the information about the medical condition, assuming it is a private matter for the learner to disclose to the NZTA. This fails to acknowledge the instructor's professional responsibility to identify and report potential safety risks. Ethically, it breaches the duty of care owed to other road users. Legally, it could be seen as facilitating the licensing of an unsafe driver. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately report the learner to the NZTA without attempting to gather further information or discuss the concerns with the learner. While reporting is sometimes necessary, an immediate report without any attempt at dialogue or understanding the specifics of the condition could be seen as overly punitive and a breach of the learner's privacy without sufficient justification. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 encourages a measured response where possible. A further incorrect approach would be to advise the learner to simply obtain a medical certificate without understanding the nature of the condition or its implications for driving. This abdicates the instructor's responsibility to assess the situation and provide appropriate guidance based on their professional judgment and knowledge of road safety requirements. It places the burden entirely on the learner without the instructor fulfilling their duty to ensure roadworthiness. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential risks to public safety. This should be followed by an assessment of their professional and legal obligations. Where possible, open and respectful communication with the individual involved should be attempted to gather necessary information. If after reasonable attempts, concerns remain unresolved or significant risks are identified, escalation to the relevant regulatory authority, in this case the NZTA, is the appropriate course of action, guided by the principles of public safety and regulatory compliance. Question 9. Which approach would be most appropriate for a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, who has reason to believe a learner driver has a medical condition that could impair their driving ability, but the learner has not disclosed it to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA? Option A. Advise the learner of their legal obligation to disclose any medical conditions to the NZTA and their medical practitioner. Explain the safety implications and encourage them to seek appropriate medical advice and inform the NZTA. Option B. Make a personal assessment of the learner's condition and decide whether it is serious enough to warrant reporting to the NZTA. Option C. Continue with the driving lessons as normal, assuming the learner is fit to drive, and do not mention the suspected medical condition to the learner or the NZTA. Option D. Immediately report the suspected medical condition to the NZTA without discussing it with the learner first. The correct answer is A. Advise the learner of their legal obligation to disclose any medical conditions to the NZTA and their medical practitioner, explain the safety implications, and encourage them to seek appropriate medical advice and inform the NZTA. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge for a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, who is aware of a learner driver's undisclosed medical condition that could impair their ability to drive safely. The professional challenge lies in balancing the learner's right to privacy with the paramount duty of care owed to the learner, other road users, and the public. This requires careful judgment to ensure compliance with New Zealand's Land Transport Act 1998 and associated Land Transport Rule. Driver licensing. The best approach involves the driving instructor acting with integrity and transparency, while respecting the learner's privacy as much as possible. This means encouraging the learner to disclose the condition to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA, and their medical practitioner, as required by law. The instructor should explain the legal obligations and the potential risks associated with not disclosing, framing it as a necessary step for public safety and the learner's own well-being. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the regulatory requirements under the Land Transport Act 1998, which mandates that individuals must inform the NZTA of any medical condition that could affect their ability to drive safely. The instructor's role is to facilitate this disclosure and ensure the learner understands their responsibilities. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and proceed with instruction, as this breaches the duty of care and potentially violates the Land Transport Act 1998 by allowing an individual with a potentially impairing condition to continue training without proper medical assessment and notification to the NZTA. This creates a significant risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately report the learner to the NZTA without first attempting to discuss the matter with the learner and encouraging voluntary disclosure. While the intention might be to ensure safety, this action could be seen as a breach of the learner's privacy and could damage the professional relationship, potentially discouraging the learner from seeking further instruction or complying with future requirements. It bypasses the established process of encouraging self-reporting and medical consultation. Finally, an approach that involves making a subjective judgment about the severity of the condition and deciding whether or not to report it based on personal assessment is also professionally unacceptable. Such decisions must be based on medical advice and regulatory requirements, not the instructor's personal opinion, as they lack the medical expertise to make such determinations. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves 1. Identifying the potential risk and the relevant legal and ethical obligations. 2. Prioritizing public safety and compliance with the Land Transport Act 1998 and Land Transport Rule, driver licensing. 3. Engaging in open and honest communication with the individual involved, explaining their responsibilities and the potential consequences of noncompliance. 4. Encouraging voluntary disclosure and seeking appropriate professional advice, medical and regulatory. 5. Escalating the matter through appropriate channels only when voluntary compliance is not achieved or when immediate risk is evident, always adhering to privacy principles where possible. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, needs to advise a student on the potential total cost of their upcoming driving test. The standard driving test fee is $123.00, and each subsequent retest also costs $123.00. If the instructor conservatively advises the student to budget for the possibility of one retest, what is the maximum total amount the student should be prepared to pay for the test and one potential retest, according to the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA fee structure? Option A, $184.50. Option B, $123.00. Option C, $246.00. Option D, $369.00. The correct answer is C, $246.00. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, by requiring them to calculate the potential financial implications of a student's driving test booking. The challenge lies in accurately forecasting costs based on variable factors like test duration and potential retests, while adhering to the fee structures set by the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. Miscalculation could lead to financial discrepancies, impacting both the instructor's profitability and the student's understanding of their financial commitment. Careful judgment is required to ensure transparency and accuracy in financial advice provided to clients. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the total potential cost by considering the standard test fee and the possibility of a retest, using the most up-to-date information from the NZTA. This approach ensures that the student is fully informed of the maximum financial outlay they might incur. The calculation should be \text total potential cost equals \text standard test fee plus \text number of potential retests times \text retest fee \. For example, if the standard test fee is $123.00 and the retest fee is $123.00 and we anticipate one potential retest, the total potential cost is $123.00 plus 1 times $123.00 equals $246.00. This aligns with the NZTA fee structure and promotes transparency, a key ethical consideration in client relationships. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only quote the standard test fee without mentioning the possibility or cost of a retest. This is a regulatory failure, as it misrepresents the potential financial commitment to the student, failing to provide a complete picture as per the NZTA guidelines on clear fee communication. Another incorrect approach is to estimate a cost based on an arbitrary number of potential retests without a clear basis or explanation. This lacks transparency and can lead to confusion or distrust, as it doesn't directly reflect the NZTA fee structure for individual retests. A further incorrect approach is to simply add the standard test fee to a hypothetical, unverified retest fee that is not aligned with the current NZTA schedule. This is both a regulatory failure, as it uses incorrect pricing information, and an ethical failure, as it provides inaccurate financial advice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and adherence to regulatory guidelines. This involves 1. Identifying the core regulatory body and its fee schedule, NZTA in this case. 2. Understanding all potential cost components, standard test, retests. 3. Calculating a realistic maximum cost based on these components and current fees. 4. Communicating this potential cost clearly to the client, explaining the variables involved. 5. Always referencing official sources for fee information. Question 11. System analysis indicates a resident in the Bay of Plenty has lodged a complaint with the Regional Council regarding a vehicle repeatedly parking illegally in a residential zone. The complainant has provided the vehicle's registration number, but is hesitant to directly confront the driver. As a Bay of Plenty Regional Council officer tasked with investigating this matter, which of the following approaches best aligns with New Zealand's regulatory framework and professional ethical standards for handling such complaints? Option A. Provide the complainant with the registered owner's contact information so they can address the parking issue directly with the owner. Option B. Utilize council records to identify the registered owner of the vehicle and contact them to discuss the complaint and seek resolution. Option C. Advise the complainant to approach the driver of the vehicle directly and resolve the issue themselves. Option D. Request the complainant to try and obtain the driver's personal details from neighbors or other sources to provide to the council. The correct answer is B. Utilize council records to identify the registered owner of the vehicle and contact them to discuss the complaint and seek resolution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the privacy rights of individuals and the regulatory obligations of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. The council officer must act ethically and legally, ensuring that any information shared or requested adheres to the principles of data protection and the specific requirements of New Zealand privacy legislation, particularly the Privacy Act 2020. The pressure to resolve a public complaint quickly can tempt an officer to bypass proper procedures, leading to potential breaches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the council officer directly contacting the registered owner of the vehicle, as identified through official vehicle registration records accessible to the council. This approach is correct because it respects the privacy of the driver by not disclosing their identity to the complainant and adheres to the principles of the Privacy Act 2020, specifically Principle 11, limited use and disclosure. By contacting the registered owner, the council can investigate the complaint while maintaining data confidentiality and fulfilling its duty to address public concerns. This method ensures that any subsequent action taken is based on legitimate inquiry and within legal boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. requesting the complainant to directly confront the driver of the vehicle is professionally unacceptable. This approach outsources the counsel's investigative responsibility and potentially exposes the complainant to an uncomfortable or even unsafe situation, violating the counsel's duty of care and potentially contravening privacy principles by encouraging unauthorized disclosure of personal information. Furthermore, it bypasses the counsel's established procedures for handling complaints and enforcing regulations. Attempting to obtain the driver's personal details from the complainant without a clear legal basis or consent is also professionally unacceptable. This action risks breaching the Privacy Act 2020 by seeking to collect personal information indirectly and without the knowledge or consent of the individual concerned. It also places the complainant in a position of handling sensitive personal data inappropriately. Sharing the registered owner's contact details with the complainant is professionally unacceptable. This is a direct breach of the Privacy Act 2020, specifically Principle 11, Limited Use and Disclosure, as it involves disclosing personal information to a third party without the consent of the individual or a lawful purpose. This action could lead to harassment or misuse of personal data. Professional reasoning. Professionals in public service, such as counsel officers, must adopt a systematic approach to problem solving that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a complaint, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the nature of the complaint and the relevant regulations. 2. Determining the appropriate authority and resources to investigate. 3. Adhering strictly to privacy legislation and data protection principles when handling personal information. 4. Communicating transparently with all parties involved, within the bounds of privacy. 5. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made. This structured approach ensures accountability, fairness, and adherence to the law. Question 12. System analysis indicates a driver licensing applicant in Tauranga, Bay of Plenty, is visibly distressed and explains they urgently need their license for a new job opportunity that starts next week. During the practical driving test, the applicant consistently fails to check their blind spots when changing lanes and demonstrates poor judgment when merging into moderate traffic. As a licensing officer, what is the most appropriate course of action according to the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017? Option A. Postpone the test indefinitely, suggesting the applicant practice more and rebook when they feel more confident without a formal fail. Option B. Pass the applicant, acknowledging their urgent need for the license and making a mental note to advise them to be more careful in the future. Option C. Offer to guide the applicant through the remaining parts of the test to ensure they pass, given their difficult circumstances. Option D. Fail the applicant due to demonstrated safety deficiencies, clearly explaining the reasons for the failure based on the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017. The correct answer is D. Fail the applicant due to demonstrated safety deficiencies, clearly explaining the reasons for the failure based on the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the paramount importance of public safety and adherence to licensing regulations in New Zealand. A licensing officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are granted a license, without succumbing to external pressures or personal biases. The integrity of the licensing system relies on objective assessment and strict compliance with the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's driving skills against the criteria set out in the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017. This includes evaluating their ability to control the vehicle, observe traffic, and make safe decisions in various driving conditions. If the applicant demonstrates a lack of proficiency in any critical area, such as failing to check blind spots or misjudging distances, the officer must fail them, regardless of their personal circumstances or stated urgency. This approach upholds the regulatory framework's primary objective, to ensure that only safe drivers are licensed, thereby protecting all road users in the Bay of Plenty. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves passing the applicant despite clear deficiencies in their driving ability, based on their personal circumstances or a desire to be accommodating. This directly contravenes the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017, which mandates that all applicants must meet specific competency standards. Failing to do so compromises public safety and undermines the credibility of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is to postpone the test indefinitely or suggest the applicant simply try again later without providing constructive feedback on their performance. While the applicant may not be ready, the role of the licensing officer includes assessing their current readiness. A failure, coupled with clear reasons, is a more appropriate outcome than an indefinite delay that doesn't address the immediate safety concerns. A third incorrect approach is to offer to help the applicant by subtly guiding them through the test or overlooking minor errors. This is unethical and illegal, as it constitutes a fraudulent assessment. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 requires an impartial evaluation, and any deviation from this standard erodes public trust and creates a dangerous precedent. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety above all else. This involves 1. Understanding and strictly adhering to the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. 2. Conducting objective assessments based on observable driving behaviors. 3. Documenting all observations and the rationale for the pass or fail decision. 4. Resisting any form of pressure or bias that could compromise the integrity of the assessment. 5. Providing clear and constructive feedback to applicants, even in the event of a failure, to guide their future learning. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals a potential bottleneck in the Bay of Plenty driver's test booking system, impacting applicant experience and examiner utilization. Considering the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which of the following approaches best addresses this issue while maintaining the integrity of the driver licensing process? Option A. Immediately increase the number of available testing slots across all days and times to accommodate more applicants, regardless of demand fluctuations. Option B. Implement a policy to reduce the standard duration of all driving tests to allow for more bookings within the existing timeframe. Option C. Allow applicants to reschedule their tests an unlimited number of times without any notice period to maximize applicant convenience. Option D. Conduct a thorough analysis of current booking data, applicant feedback, and examiner schedules to identify specific inefficiencies and propose targeted improvements to the system and rostering. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough analysis of current booking data, applicant feedback, and examiner schedules to identify specific inefficiencies and propose targeted improvements to the system and rostering. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential bottleneck in the Bay of Plenty driver's test booking system, impacting applicant experience and examiner utilization. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the needs of multiple stakeholders: applicants seeking timely tests, examiners needing efficient scheduling, and the NZ Transport Agency, NZTA, aiming for a smooth, fair, and cost-effective system. Careful judgment is required to identify solutions that are not only efficient, but also compliant with the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and uphold the integrity of the licensing process. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the booking system's current performance metrics, including wait times, cancellation rates, and examiner availability, alongside direct feedback from both applicants and examiners. This data-driven, stakeholder-informed strategy allows for the identification of root causes of inefficiency, such as peak demand periods, inadequate examiner rostering, or technical glitches. By understanding these specific issues, targeted improvements can be proposed that align with NZTA objectives of providing accessible and reliable driver testing services, as mandated by the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which emphasizes fairness and efficiency in licensing procedures. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of available testing slots without analyzing demand patterns or examiner capacity would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to underutilized resources during off-peak times and exacerbate existing issues during peak periods, failing to address the core inefficiencies and potentially contravening the spirit of efficient resource allocation under the rule. Another unacceptable approach would be to implement a blanket policy of reducing test duration to fit more applicants into existing slots. This disregards the importance of thorough assessment as required by the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which mandates sufficient time for examiners to properly evaluate a candidate's driving competency. Shortening tests could compromise the quality of assessment, leading to potentially unsafe drivers being licensed and undermining public safety, a primary concern for the NZTA. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes only applicant convenience by allowing unlimited rescheduling without penalty would be professionally unsound. While applicant satisfaction is important, this could lead to significant disruption for examiners and inefficient use of testing resources due to last-minute cancellations, failing to uphold the principle of efficient system management. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the problem and identifying all relevant stakeholders. This is followed by gathering data and feedback from all perspectives, analyzing this information to pinpoint root causes, and then developing a range of potential solutions. Each solution should be evaluated against regulatory requirements, like the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, ethical considerations, and stakeholder impact before implementation. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are crucial to ensure the chosen solution remains effective and compliant. Question 14. System analysis indicates that a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, has been coaching a learner driver who is eager to book their practical driving test. During a pre-test assessment, the instructor observes several instances where the learner demonstrates hesitation at intersections, struggles with parallel parking under pressure, and occasionally exceeds the speed limit on residential streets. The learner expresses strong confidence and insists they are ready for the test, considering the instructor's responsibility under New Zealand's road safety framework, which approach best reflects professional and ethical conduct. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the learner's performance against the official Bay of Plenty practical driving test criteria, provide detailed feedback on the observed weaknesses, and advise the learner that further practice is required before they are ready for the test, explaining the safety implications. Option B. Recommend the learner for the practical driving test immediately, given their eagerness and confidence, with a note to the examiner about potential areas to watch. Option C. Focus on the learner's strengths and positive feedback, downplaying the observed errors and encouraging them to book the test as soon as possible to capitalize on their current motivation. Option D. Tell the learner that while there are minor areas for improvement, their overall confidence suggests they should proceed with the test, as examiners are accustomed to assessing learners with varying skill levels. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the learner's performance against the official Bay of Plenty practical driving test criteria, provide detailed feedback on the observed weaknesses, and advise the learner that further practice is required before they are ready for the test, explaining the safety implications. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, who is tasked with assessing a learner driver's readiness for the practical driving test. The challenge lies in balancing the learner's eagerness to pass with the instructor's ethical and legal responsibility to ensure public safety. The instructor must make a judgment call that prioritizes safety and adherence to the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, even if it means disappointing the learner. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and objective assessment of the learner's driving skills against the criteria set out in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and the NZTA Practical Driving Test Standards. This approach prioritizes the safety of the learner, the instructor, and other road users. It involves identifying specific areas of weakness, providing constructive feedback, and recommending further practice or lessons before re-attempting the test. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the legal requirement to ensure drivers are competent before being licensed. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves succumbing to the learner's pressure and recommending them for the test despite clear safety concerns. This breaches the ethical duty of care and the legal obligation to ensure driver competency, potentially leading to accidents and contravening the spirit of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the learner's concerns about their readiness and push them towards the test without a proper, objective assessment. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and disregards the learner's own perception of their skill level, which, while not solely determinative, is a factor in effective instruction. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the learner's desire to pass quickly, overlooking critical safety maneuvers or adherence to traffic laws. This prioritizes a commercial outcome over public safety and professional integrity, failing to uphold the standards expected of a driving instructor in Bay of Plenty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. This involves objectively assessing the situation against established standards, considering all relevant factors, learner's skill, safety, regulatory compliance, and then making a decision that upholds professional integrity and public safety. Open and honest communication with the learner about the assessment findings and the rationale for the decision is also crucial. Question 15. System analysis indicates that a driver testing officer in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, is conducting a practical driving assessment for a license applicant. Midway through the test, the applicant begins to exhibit clear signs of significant anxiety, including trembling hands and difficulty concentrating on instructions. Considering the regulatory framework governing driver licensing in New Zealand, what is the most appropriate course of action for the testing officer? Option A. Advise the applicant to just push through it as it's important to complete the test. Option B. Pause the test to assess the applicant's condition and determine if they are fit to continue safely. Option C. Continue the test as scheduled, instructing the applicant to try and focus. Option D. Immediately fail the applicant for demonstrating an inability to cope with the testing situation. The correct answer is B. Pause the test to assess the applicant's condition and determine if they are fit to continue safely. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver testing officer in Bay of Plenty, New Zealand, who is tasked with assessing a candidate's readiness for a driver's license. The challenge lies in balancing the need to adhere strictly to the New Zealand Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and the practical realities of a testing environment, particularly when a candidate exhibits signs of distress that could impact their performance and potentially their safety on the road. The officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure the integrity of the testing process, while also considering the well-being of the candidate and public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves pausing the test and assessing the candidate's condition. This approach aligns with the overarching objective of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which is to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed. If a candidate is demonstrably distressed to the point where their ability to safely operate a vehicle is compromised, continuing the test would be irresponsible and could lead to an unsafe outcome. The officer has a duty of care to the candidate and the public. By pausing, the officer can determine if the candidate is fit to continue or if the test needs to be rescheduled, thereby upholding the integrity of the licensing process and prioritizing safety. This aligns with the principles of responsible assessment and risk management inherent in driver licensing. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing the test without addressing the candidate's distress is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to acknowledge the potential impact of the candidate's emotional state on their driving ability, which is a critical factor in assessing competency under the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. It prioritizes the completion of the test over the safety of the candidate and other road users, contravening the fundamental purpose of the licensing regime. Suggesting the candidate just push through it is also professionally unsound. This dismisses the candidate's observable distress and places undue pressure on them, potentially exacerbating their condition and leading to a dangerous driving situation. It demonstrates a lack of empathy and a failure to recognize that a driver's mental and emotional state is integral to their safe operation of a vehicle. Immediately failing the candidate without attempting to understand the cause or impact of their distress is premature and potentially unfair. While the ultimate goal is to ensure safe drivers, a hasty failure without proper assessment of the candidate's current capacity to drive safely, considering their distress, may not be justified under the spirit of the regulations. The officer should first ascertain if the distress is temporary and manageable, or if it fundamentally impairs their ability to perform the required driving tasks safely. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and fairness. This involves 1. Observation and assessment. Carefully observe the candidate's behavior and assess if their distress is impacting their ability to drive safely. 2. Communication. Engage with the candidate to understand their condition and its potential impact. 3. Rule application. Consider the relevant provisions of the Land Transport Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, particularly those pertaining to driver competency and safety. 4. Risk management. Evaluate the risks associated with continuing the test versus rescheduling. 5. Professional judgment. Apply professional judgment to make a decision that upholds the integrity of the testing process and ensures public safety. Question 16. System analysis indicates that a driving instructor in the Bay of Plenty region is preparing a learner driver for their upcoming practical driving test. The learner is enthusiastic and eager to take the test, but the instructor has observed recurring issues with their hazard perception and adherence to speed limits in varied traffic conditions during recent practice sessions. Considering the regulatory framework for driver licensing in New Zealand, which approach best balances the learner's aspirations with the imperative of road safety and responsible instruction. Option A. Proceed with the test as scheduled, assuming the pressure of the actual test will help the learner overcome their current driving deficiencies. Option B. Advise the learner that they are not ready and cancel the test immediately without providing detailed feedback on the specific areas of concern. Option C. Focus the remaining practice sessions on building the learner's confidence and positive attitude, downplaying the observed technical driving issues. Option D. Conduct a final assessment of the learner's current driving ability against the official Bay of Plenty driver's test criteria, identify specific areas requiring further practice, and schedule additional lessons focused on those weaknesses before recommending the test. The correct answer is D. Conduct a final assessment of the learner's current driving ability against the official Bay of Plenty driver's test criteria, identify specific areas requiring further practice, and schedule additional lessons focused on those weaknesses before recommending the test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a learner driver with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to the specific licensing regulations of the Bay of Plenty region in New Zealand. The instructor must assess the learner's readiness for the test while also upholding the integrity of the testing process and ensuring public safety. Misjudging the learner's competence could lead to a failed test, potential safety risks on the road, and damage to the instructor's professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the learner's driving skills against the official Bay of Plenty driver's test criteria. This means identifying specific areas where the learner consistently demonstrates proficiency and areas where improvement is still needed. The instructor should then provide targeted feedback and additional practice focused on the identified weaknesses, ensuring the learner is not only prepared for the test, but also a safe and competent driver. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to the learner and the public, and the regulatory requirement to ensure drivers meet the standards set by the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA, for the Bay of Plenty region. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the test despite recognizing significant, unaddressed deficiencies in the learner's driving. This disregards the regulatory framework that mandates a certain level of competence for licensing and prioritizes the learner's desire to test over public safety. It also fails to uphold the ethical responsibility of an instructor to ensure their students are genuinely ready. Another incorrect approach is to cancel the test without providing clear, constructive feedback on the specific areas needing improvement. While safety is a concern, simply canceling without explanation leaves the learner uninformed about their shortcomings and may lead to frustration and a lack of progress. This fails to meet the professional standard of guidance and support expected from a driving instructor. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the learner's confidence or enthusiasm, overlooking critical skill gaps. While confidence is important, it cannot substitute for demonstrated competency in areas such as hazard perception, vehicle control, and adherence to road rules, which are fundamental to passing the Bay of Plenty driver's test and ensuring safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory requirements, NZTA guidelines for the Bay of Plenty. This is followed by an objective evaluation of the situation against these standards. Ethical considerations, such as duty of care and professional integrity, should then guide the decision. Finally, communication of the decision and the rationale behind it, with a focus on constructive feedback and a clear path forward, is crucial for maintaining professional relationships and fostering learner development. Question 17. System analysis indicates that a driving instructor in the Bay of Plenty has been coaching a learner driver for several months. The learner expresses high confidence in their abilities and believes they are ready for their restricted driver's license test. However, during recent practice sessions, the instructor has noted the learner occasionally hesitates at intersections and sometimes drifts within their lane, particularly when fatigued. The instructor is aware that the learner's family is eager for them to pass the test soon. Considering the instructor's professional obligations under New Zealand's Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and NZTA driver testing standards, which approach best reflects responsible and ethical practice. Option A. The instructor focuses primarily on ensuring the learner can execute the specific maneuvers required for the test, such as parallel parking and three-point turns, and recommends them for the test if these are performed well. Option B. The instructor conducts a thorough review of the learner's performance against all criteria in the official Bay of Plenty driver testing standards, ensuring consistent demonstration of safe driving practices and hazard perception before recommending them for the test. Option C. The instructor feels pressured by the learner's family's eagerness and decides to recommend the learner for the test, hoping the examiner will be lenient with minor errors. Option D. The instructor proceeds with recommending the learner for the test, acknowledging their expressed confidence and recent positive practice sessions, while advising them to be extra careful on the day. The correct answer is B. The instructor conducts a thorough review of the learner's performance against all criteria in the official Bay of Plenty driver testing standards, ensuring consistent demonstration of safe driving practices and hazard perception before recommending them for the test. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a learner driver with the overarching responsibility to ensure public safety on the roads of the Bay of Plenty. The instructor must assess the learner's readiness for the test while adhering strictly to the New Zealand Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, and the NZTA driver testing procedures. The pressure to pass, coupled with the potential for a learner to overestimate their abilities, necessitates a rigorous and objective evaluation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the instructor meticulously reviewing the learner's performance against the official Bay of Plenty driver testing criteria. This includes assessing their ability to demonstrate hazard perception, vehicle control, and adherence to traffic laws in a real-world driving environment. The instructor must ensure the learner can consistently apply safe driving practices, such as maintaining appropriate speed, correct lane positioning, and effective observation, without prompting. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the NZTA mandate to license competent and safe drivers, thereby upholding public safety on Bay of Plenty roads as stipulated by the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. It prioritizes objective assessment over subjective feelings or external pressures. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves the instructor allowing the learner to proceed to the test based on their expressed confidence and a few recent successful practice sessions, despite the instructor having observed recurring minor errors in observation and speed management. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for demonstrated competence and could lead to the licensing of an unsafe driver, contravening the spirit and letter of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Another incorrect approach is for the instructor to feel pressured by the learner's family to give them a chance and overlook significant hesitation at intersections and a tendency to drift within the lane. This prioritizes personal relationships or external pressure over the legal and ethical obligation to ensure road safety, violating the professional standards expected of a registered driving instructor under NZTA guidelines. A further incorrect approach is for the instructor to focus solely on the learner's ability to perform specific maneuvers like parallel parking, while neglecting their overall hazard awareness and decision-making in varied traffic conditions. This narrow focus does not constitute a comprehensive assessment of driving competency as required by the NZTA testing standards and the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory framework NZTA Driver Licensing Rule 2017 and Testing Procedures. This involves objective observation and evaluation of the learner's performance against defined competency standards. Any decision to recommend a learner for testing must be based on evidence of consistent safe driving behavior and hazard management, free from personal bias or external influence. If a learner does not meet the required standards, the professional's duty is to provide constructive feedback and further training, rather than compromising safety for expediency. Question 18. System analysis indicates that a learner driver in the Bay of Plenty region, who has been practicing for their Class 1 driver's license test, is showing significant improvement in their confidence and enthusiasm. However, during their last practice session, they made several minor errors related to lane positioning and failed to anticipate a pedestrian crossing a quiet residential street, requiring the instructor to intervene. Considering the New Zealand Transport Agency's NZTA requirements for driver licensing and the need to ensure road safety, which of the following approaches best reflects professional and ethical conduct for the driving instructor? Option A. Advise the learner to postpone their test indefinitely until they demonstrate perfect driving, as even minor errors indicate they are not ready. Option B. Recommend the learner for the test immediately, citing their increased confidence and general progress, as the test itself will reveal any remaining issues. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the learner's performance against the official Bay of Plenty driver's test criteria, focusing on identifying specific areas of weakness in hazard perception and vehicle control, and provide targeted practice before reconsidering test readiness. Option D. Proceed with the test, but inform the testing officer beforehand about the learner's recent errors, hoping for leniency. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of the learner's performance against the official Bay of Plenty driver's test criteria, focusing on identifying specific areas of weakness in hazard perception and vehicle control, and provide targeted practice before reconsidering test readiness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a learner driver with the overarching responsibility of ensuring road safety and adherence to the specific regulations of the Bay of Plenty region in New Zealand. The instructor must assess the learner's readiness for the test while also considering the potential risks associated with their current skill level and the expectations of the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA, testing officers. The pressure to pass, combined with the learner's anxiety, can cloud judgment, making a structured, evidence-based approach crucial. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the learner's performance against the official Bay of Plenty driver's test criteria, focusing on demonstrated competency in hazard perception, vehicle control, and adherence to road rules. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the NZTA mandate for driver licensing, which prioritizes public safety. By systematically evaluating the learner's ability to safely navigate typical driving situations and demonstrating mastery of the required skills, the instructor provides an accurate reflection of their readiness for the official test. This method ensures that the instructor is acting ethically by not recommending a test the learner is unlikely to pass, thereby saving the learner time and money, and more importantly, upholding the integrity of the licensing process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending the learner for the test solely based on their enthusiasm and a general sense of improvement, without a detailed, objective evaluation of specific driving skills against the test criteria, is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks misrepresenting the learner's capabilities to the testing officer and potentially placing other road users at risk if the learner is not truly competent. Another unacceptable approach is to postpone the test indefinitely due to a single minor error or a moment of nervousness. This fails to acknowledge that learning involves mistakes and that the test itself is designed to assess how a driver manages such situations. It also does not serve the learner's goal of obtaining a license in a timely manner. Finally, pushing the learner to take the test despite clear evidence of significant deficiencies in critical areas like hazard perception or vehicle control is unethical and irresponsible. This prioritizes the instructor's desire for a pass rate over the learner's safety and the safety of the public. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment, adherence to regulatory standards, and ethical considerations. This involves 1. understanding the specific requirements and criteria of the relevant licensing body, NZTA for Bay of Plenty. 2. Conducting regular, structured assessments that mirror the test conditions and evaluate specific competencies. 3. Maintaining professional objectivity, separating personal feelings or pressure from the assessment of skill. 4. Communicating clearly and honestly with the learner about their progress and areas needing improvement. 5. Making recommendations based on evidence of competence, not on subjective feelings or external pressures. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that a Bay of Plenty driver's test examiner, while conducting a practical assessment, notices a driver exhibiting significant nervousness, including occasional hesitations and minor steering adjustments. The driver expresses a strong desire to pass and asks if minor mistakes can be overlooked. Which approach should the examiner adopt to ensure compliance with the Bay of Plenty driver's test regulations and ethical road safety standards? Option A. Allow the driver to engage in a lengthy discussion about their perceived minor mistakes during the test to build rapport. Option B. Meticulously document all observed driving faults, categorizing them according to the official Bay of Plenty driver's test fault assessment criteria. Option C. Focus primarily on the driver's overall positive attitude and willingness to learn, rather than the specific driving actions observed. Option D. Overlook minor errors due to sympathy for the driver's apparent nervousness and strong desire to pass. The correct answer is B. Meticulously document all observed driving faults, categorizing them according to the official Bay of Plenty driver's test fault assessment criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a driver's desire to pass the Bay of Plenty driver's test and the examiner's duty to uphold road safety standards. The driver's anxiety and potential for minor errors, coupled with the examiner's responsibility to objectively assess competence, requires careful judgment to ensure fairness and safety. The examiner must balance the need to identify genuine risks with the understanding that nerves can affect performance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the examiner meticulously documenting all observed driving faults, categorizing them according to the official Bay of Plenty driver's test fault assessment criteria. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the established regulatory framework for driver licensing in the Bay of Plenty region. By systematically recording and classifying faults, the examiner ensures an objective, consistent, and defensible assessment. This aligns with the ethical obligation to prioritize public safety by only licensing drivers who meet the required standards of competence and hazard perception. The documentation provides a clear record of the assessment, which is crucial for accountability and for the driver to understand areas for improvement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to overlook minor errors due to sympathy for the driver's apparent nervousness. This fails to meet regulatory requirements because the Bay of Plenty driver's test is designed to assess a minimum standard of safe driving, regardless of the driver's emotional state. Overlooking faults compromises the integrity of the testing process and potentially places other road users at risk. Another incorrect approach is to allow the driver to engage in a lengthy discussion about their perceived minor mistakes during the test. This deviates from the structured assessment process mandated by the Bay of Plenty driver's test guidelines. Such discussions can distract the examiner, disrupt the flow of the test, and potentially lead to subjective judgments rather than objective fault assessment, thereby failing to uphold the regulatory framework. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the driver's overall positive attitude and willingness to learn, rather than the specific driving actions observed. While positive attributes are desirable, the Bay of Plenty driver's test is a practical assessment of driving skill and adherence to road rules. Prioritizing attitude over demonstrated competence is a failure to comply with the core purpose and regulatory basis of the test, which is to ensure safe driving practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established regulations and ethical principles. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific fault assessment criteria of the Bay of Plenty driver's test. 2. Maintaining strict objectivity and impartiality throughout the assessment. 3. Documenting all observed faults accurately and contemporaneously. 4. Focusing on observable driving behavior and its adherence to road rules and safety standards. 5. recognizing that the primary ethical duty is to public safety, which is achieved through rigorous and fair assessment. Question 20. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some clients approaching retirement in Bay of Plenty are experiencing unexpected financial pressures and are requesting early access to their superannuation funds. A client, aged 58, states they need to withdraw $20,000 from their New Zealand superannuation fund to cover immediate living expenses due to a temporary loss of income. Based on the New Zealand Superannuation Fund Act and relevant financial advisory guidelines, what is the most appropriate course of action for a financial advisor? Option A. Inform the client that early withdrawal is impossible and refuse to discuss the matter further, as they are under the standard retirement age. Option B. Immediately process the withdrawal request for $20,000, as the client has indicated a need for funds to cover living expenses. Option C. Verify the client's eligibility for early withdrawal by assessing if their situation meets the statutory criteria for severe financial hardship or other permissible early release conditions as defined by the New Zealand Superannuation Fund Act. And if not, explain the regulatory limitations and explore alternative compliant financial strategies. Option D. Advise the client that they can withdraw the funds by stating they are facing an unspecified emergency, as this is a common practice for accessing superannuation early. The correct answer is C. Verify the client's eligibility for early withdrawal by assessing if their situation meets the statutory criteria for severe financial hardship or other permissible early release conditions as defined by the New Zealand Superannuation Fund Act. And if not, explain the regulatory limitations and explore alternative compliant financial strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial needs of a client with the long-term implications of their financial decisions, particularly concerning their retirement savings. The client's emotional state and potential for impulsive decisions add another layer of complexity, necessitating a calm, analytical, and ethically grounded approach. The advisor must navigate the client's immediate desire for funds against the regulatory framework governing superannuation withdrawals in New Zealand, specifically the conditions under which early access is permitted. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the client's circumstances against the eligibility criteria for early withdrawal of superannuation funds as defined by the New Zealand Superannuation Fund, NZSF, Act and relevant financial advisory codes of conduct. This includes verifying if the client's stated need for funds meets the statutory definitions of severe financial hardship, terminal illness, or other permissible early release conditions. If the client's situation does not meet these strict criteria, the advisor must ethically and professionally explain why early withdrawal is not possible under current regulations and explore alternative, compliant financial solutions. This approach upholds regulatory compliance, protects the client's long-term financial security, and maintains the advisor's professional integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately process the withdrawal request without verifying eligibility. This fails to adhere to the NZSF Act's provisions for early withdrawal, potentially leading to regulatory breaches and exposing both the client and the advisor to penalties. It also disregards the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best long-term interests, as early withdrawal can significantly deplete retirement savings. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the client that they can simply withdraw the funds by stating they need them for an unspecified emergency, without confirming if this aligns with the legal definitions of hardship. This misrepresents the regulatory framework and could be construed as facilitating a breach of the Superannuation Schemes Act, undermining the integrity of the retirement savings system. A third incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without exploring any potential avenues or providing clear, reasoned explanations. While the client's request may not be immediately fulfillable, a professional advisor should still engage with the client, explain the limitations, and offer guidance on alternative strategies or future possibilities, demonstrating empathy and a commitment to client welfare within the bounds of regulation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and client well-being. This involves 1. Active listening and empathy. Understand the client's situation and emotional state. 2. Regulatory assessment. Thoroughly review the relevant legislation, e.g., NZSF Act, Superannuation Schemes Act, and codes of conduct to determine eligibility for the requested action. 3. Factual verification. Gather and confirm all necessary information to support or refute the client's claim against regulatory criteria. 4. Ethical consideration. Ensure the proposed course of action aligns with professional ethical obligations, particularly the duty to act in the client's best interests. 5. Clear communication. Explain the findings, rationale, and any limitations or alternative options to the client in an understandable manner. 6. Documentation. Maintain detailed records of all discussions, assessments, and decisions.